While you continue to enjoy your lunch, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce representatives from several companies who have made today's event possible. Please hold your applause until I introduce everyone. Seated to my far right, your left, we have Shelby Beal, President and CEO of TTCU Federal Credit Union, a gold sponsor. David Keglowitz, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at One Oak, a DEI benefactor. Angela Copeland, Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at One Gas, a DEI benefactor. Michael Campbell, Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager at Williams, a DEI benefactor. Victoria Jabara, Vice President and DEI Consultant for BOK Financial, representing Bank of Oklahoma, a DEI benefactor. Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. Bill Knight, Oklahoma City Thunder fan and President of Knight Automotive Group and Chair of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. Jonathan Long, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Tulsa Regional Chamber. And seated to my immediate left, your right, Tennille Bent, Executive Vice President of Culture and Engagement with Family and Children's Services, today's speaker sponsor. Silas Dulan III, Founder and CEO of the Dulan Business Group and today's keynote speaker. Jennifer Jezik, 2024 Chair of the Tulsa Regional Chamber and Vice President and Oklahoma Division Manager for President and Founder of Sovereign Stewardship. Dr. Cliff Robertson, President and CEO of St. Francis Health System and incoming Chair of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. Amanda Bryson, Director of Human Resources Operations for the Tulsa Airports Improvement Trust, a DEI benefactor. Lindsay Hutchinson, President and CEO of Tulsa Zoo Management, a gold sponsor. Jason Collington, Executive Director of the Tulsa World Media Company, a gold sponsor. Bailey Siegfried, and Vice President of Culture, Communication, and Human Resources at NORDAM, a DEI benefactor. And Alison Anthony, President and Chief Executive Officer at Tulsa Area United Way. In addition to these sponsors seated at the head table, we owe special thanks to Helmerich & Payne, a gold sponsor, Southwest Airlines, a gold sponsor, Matrix Service Company, a DEI benefactor, Blue Cross Blue Shield, a DEI benefactor, and CF Industries, a DEI benefactor. Thank you also to each of our silver and table sponsors, which are listed on the back of your programs. Please join me in thanking all of our sponsors for their support. Now I'd like to move into our formal programming for the day. Please help me welcome Tennille Bent, Executive Vice President of Culture and Engagement at Family and Children's Services, today's speaker sponsor, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my absolute honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Silas S. Dulan III. Silas is the founder and CEO of the Dulan Business Group, an organization built on the belief that the future of business hinges on relationships and innovation. Through the Dulan Business Group, Silas connects businesses, advises senior leaders, and helps organizations cultivate workplaces by addressing their most pressing people and business challenges. Most recently, Silas served as the inaugural Associate Vice President and Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Black & Veatch, a world leader in engineering and construction, where he designed and implemented the company's global cultural competency strategy. Previously, he was the first Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Evergy, where he developed and executed the company's DEI strategy. His tenure at Evergy also included roles as a senior HR business partner for operations and as a trading analyst in power marketing. Earlier, Silas held leadership positions in talent acquisition and workforce development at Kiewit and served as Director of Multicultural Affairs and Director of Retention at Baker University, fostering student success and engagement. An active community leader, Silas serves on the Board of Trustees for Baker University and holds board positions with the Kansas African American Museum and the Center for Energy Workforce Development, where he serves as Emeritus Vice Chair. He previously served on the Kansas Advisory Committee for Careers and Technical Education and the National Utility Diversity Council. Today, we are thrilled to have Silas share his insights through his presentation, Built to Withstand: Inclusion as Infrastructure for Community and Commerce. Please welcome Silas Dulan.
Good afternoon. I'm going to try it one more time. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. All righty. Hello, Tulsa. I'm really excited to be here to have this conversation with regards to how we're built to withstand inclusion as an infrastructure for community and commerce. So before I say anything else, I want to do a couple of things. Number one, I want to recognize the grounds that we're standing up on. In particular, with regards to the, Osage, Muskogee Creek, and Cherokee Nation, to acknowledge, respect, and uplift these communities that we stand upon today. As a rule of thumb, whenever I have a conversation, understanding the indigenous lands that we all stand upon here as Americans was first inhabited by our indigenous people. So I want to make sure I pay homage and give respect to those that were here before us. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you all today. So a couple of things. First, I want to thank the Chamber. Brother JL, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be actually back in my home state. You all probably can't tell by now, but I'm an Okie. Believing all of my roots, I did show up in some boots. We'll catch those a little bit later on. For those that know, you know. We'll walk you through a handful of topics. Jonathan said I have 22 to 25 minutes. I do like to talk, so I'll make sure I keep us in tight schedule there. I'll give you a little bit more of my story. I've got a quick commercial because I am an entrepreneur. I want to talk a little bit about the moment that we're in. You know, one of my favorite conversations is when people say, when they look back on time, if I was born during this time, during apartheid South Africa, or when Pharaoh was doing his thing to the Israelites, or during slavery, I would have did this, that, and the other. Well, hate to break it to you, but whatever you're doing right now in this moment is what you would have done back then, right? So we're going to dive deeper into the moment that we're currently in. We'll talk about some structures that I've been able to be a part of to put in place to withstand the headwinds of DE&I, of being a distraction, essentially, from a corporate perspective. I'll also talk about the economic impact that DE&I has, putting our community first, and we'll talk about just a small handful of calls to actions. So like I said before, I am from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, from the northeast side of town. I recognize where I'm at. I'm a Midwest City bomber. I'm not sure I have any bombers in the house, but I don't expect any, but I played football at Midwest City High School, and my high school was the last high school to win the state championship in the city, and you all in Tulsa stole the state championships from us from '99 and beyond. We're talking Owasso, we're talking Jinx, we're talking Unions, all those. I heard some whoops out there, but that's my school. I know where I'm at. I'll make sure I behave myself, right? But grew up on the east side of Oklahoma City. I've lived in Kansas City for the last 24 years. What brought me to Kansas was college. I went to Baker University, small liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Our claim to fame is being the first college in the state of Kansas, 1858. Unbeknownst to me, walking on that campus in 3 significant situations would ultimately change the trajectory of my life and my career and honestly my calling. Showing up to Baker University back in the fall of 2001, I came on a football scholarship. But leading up until that point in time in my life, my focus was always to go to an HBCU. Right? My dad went to an HBCU, went to Tennessee State. My uncle attended Langston University. All his kids went to Howard. So that was my trajectory. I'm going to an HBCU. And for whatever reason, I just fell in love with the campus in Baldwin City. So I went to Baker University, played sports there. It was a very hard road my freshman year. Being in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, I had a lot of questions around my ethnicity. You know, the question of, hey, has your dad been in jail? Hey, why do you not have gold teeth? Can I borrow your clothes for this event? You know, all those crazy things, right? So I remember calling my mom every Sunday after practice saying, these folks are asking me crazy questions. I know I should have went to Lincoln University to play for Coach Bush in Jeff City. So my mom said, Silas, God has you there for a reason. Take your time, give it the old college try, and see what happens. So I gave it the college try. There was an organization on campus that was called Mangano. Muungano is a shortened Swahili phrase meaning Brothers and Sisters United. So ultimately, that organization saved me. So I was able to get involved with Muungano and work and actually become an educator to my peers about being an African American at a predominantly white school, PWI, PWC. So within that space, I went back to Baker University and became their Director of Multicultural Affairs. So now I'm working in student affairs, working with students of color, our LGBTQ plus students, students that are international origin, all those great things. So I had a chance to work there in that aspect. The third element that would ultimately change my trajectory as well is I currently sit on the Board of Trustees at my alma mater. So I get to sit behind the scenes and ensure that equity, inclusion, and diversity is pronounced at my trusted alma mater. Also, too, within that space, my first big boy job out of college, I worked in supply chain at Sprint headquarters in Kansas City. Obviously, now it's T-Mobile. From there, I transitioned to Baker, as I briefly mentioned. But then I went to Kiewit. Kiewit is a large construction company that's based out of Omaha, Nebraska. Had the opportunity to work at 2 nuclear plants, an air quality control system in Indiana, and the power plants were in Tennessee, and then also in Omaha, Nebraska. From there, I was transitioned into HR recruiting, so I had that privilege to recruit engineers across the board for a handful of years. Then I went over to Evergy, which is the major utility based in Kansas City. So I worked as a senior HR business partner working in rural Kansas. Not sure if you all have seen the movie Blazing Saddles, but I was blackbarred going out to the middle of nowhere, Kansas. You know, I showed up and the sheriff's, right, you guys seen that movie, right? So that was me. I was the police out in middle of nowhere, Kansas for about 2 years. Had the opportunity to work in power marketing, buying and selling and trading power. Then had the opportunity to work, became the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and then transitioned to Black and Beach to lead the global strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion. As said previously, here's my real quick commercial. So I am the founder and CEO of the Dulan Business Group. I love alliteration. So my 3 verticals are consulting, connections, and conversations. Consulting in the aspect of workplace and workforce strategies, connections with regards to business development or business enablement, and in conversations like I'm doing with you all here today, having a keynote conversation. So the current moment that we're in right now, we're in a really unique space. As we all know, the topic of diversity and equity and inclusion has become very politicized, politically charged more than it ever has been before in its past. So one thing that I like to do is kind of level set that the fact of the matter is that we've been here before. We had a real quick closed-door conversation about the current state of the union when it comes to inclusion in these United States. So one thing I want to remind us of, I'm going to take us back probably about 160 years to a little something called the Civil War, right? So depending upon what piece of information you read or what you believe in, the Civil War was either fought over slavery, there's evidence for that, and there's also evidence of the Civil War was fought over slave rights. So it's fought over slavery or fought over states' rights. The second thing is the civil rights movement, so taking us probably about 70-ish or so years. So in our mind's eye, we think about the civil rights movement essentially as being old black and white footage of old racist dogs and fire hoses and these things, right? But it was called the civil rights movement, not the black rights movement, right? And I think a lot of people get that misconstrued. And then going back probably about another 50 years or so, we have something called the affirmative action movement. The affirmative action movement was something that was done, a lot of folks felt like to them versus with them, essentially. So we've been in these situations before over the time in the United States history. And then actually 5 years ago, if you guys can believe this or not, May 25th, 2020 was the murder of George Floyd. So we've had a lot of ups and downs, shifts left and right. So where are we right now with regards to where we are in this DE&I movement right now? But in order for us to understand our future, we must understand our past. Hence why I provided those couple of slides just a second ago. Now, we also have to keep in mind, too, that history repeats itself. So looking at these couple of executive orders, so back in the fall or so of 2020, 3 administrations ago, there was an executive order, Executive Order 13950. At the time, I was working for a federal contractor, and it made any type of things like we're doing right here, illegal DE&I activities will become illegal, essentially, especially if you were a federal contractor. And then you had the new administration that came in in early 2021 that reversed that. And now we're right back in the space to where everything that was undone is starting to be redone once again. So I say that to say this. I had a conversation earlier with some fellow D&I practitioners. One of the things that really is one of my pet peeves in this space is that we thought that we were safe. We thought that, we dodged a bullet, the new administration's in. But as we know, the new administration is back, and they're trying to reinforce these things. And the reason why I bring that up is because we did not do, as practitioners, a good job of saying the what if. If this were to come back, how do we instill DE&I strategies into the framework of how we're moving forward in our nation's capital, from our nation's capital to our businesses? This is a slide. It's a little bit older of a slide, but this is from March 2024. This is the precursor to show us what was getting ready to happen if we were watching this from the lens of which I've been able to watch things from. So these states right here represented the states that were essentially moving away from DE&I. And it really started, I look back at the the affirmative action movement. There was a landmark case, I believe it was 1978, University of California versus Bakke. That started on college campuses when it came to admissions of for affirmative action. So we're seeing the same thing that happened way back in 2024, and we know where we are currently with regards to how things are moving and where things are evolving from a DE&I perspective. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on these next couple of slides because I want to make sure I get everything done, and I do have a lot more to walk us through. But thinking about the current state that we're in from a 5 untapped resource talent pools perspective. The first untapped talent pool we think about at a macro level is all those individuals that may be neurodivergent. So the reason why I'm bringing these slides in, I like to talk a lot about the concept of the workplace versus the workforce. So these slides are going to represent essentially, is your workplace ready for the workforce of the future? So what's going to drive the differences of these workforces in the future are going to be those that are neurologically divergent. Then also, too, we're still seeing an increase in population of our veterans being displaced, not having opportunities for growth and development, and they're also bringing their spouses with them as well, too. The next thing I would say is we've all heard of the prison to pipeline population, where those individuals that were formerly incarcerated are looking for new employment. They're looking for opportunities to come into your workplaces, to come into your neighborhoods, to really actually have a fruitful opportunity for growth and development. One of the things I was able to build at a previous employer of mine, actually partnering with a company out of Michigan, from a line work perspective, there's a tree trimming program out of the prison system in Detroit, Michigan. What's important about that tree trimming opportunity or apprenticeship is it introduces individuals into line work. Line workers are essentially those individuals that restore energy once the power goes out. They're the folks that climb poles. So there's avenues of thinking about how do we re-enter various populations into our workforces, into our communities. So again, I go back to the conversation, is the workplace ready for the workforce of the future? Hopefully I don't offend anyone in this room, but the silver tsunami is very real. One thing that happened last year, and goodness gracious, December 31st, 2024, was the youngest baby boomer turned 60 years old, right? The youngest baby boomer turned 60 on December 31st, 2024. So we're starting to see a shift in how the workplace is showing up for the next generation of talent. Speaking of which, we have essentially 4, almost 5 generations in the workplace right now. So again, I ask the proverbial question of, is your workplace ready for the workforce of the future? Also, the moment that we're in right now as well is thinking about the talent gap. So this is a real quick Korn Ferry study showing that we could face an 8.5 trillion shortfall on talent. That's 85 million jobs are going to be at a shortfall by the year 2030. Right? It's 2025. We're almost halfway through 2025. And here we are right now having a potential shortfall on talent. Now, there are 3 things that are driving that stat. The one I've already named, we have an aging population, right? Again, the youngest baby boomer turned 60 years old at the end of last year. The second thing that's driving that, as I'm sure you all would guess, is technology, right? Artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning, and the like. And the third thing is population growth is down across the board. So that should spark some conversation, spark some interest around how are we going to move forward with regards to being able to attract new talent into our communities, into our homes, not to our homes, but into our communities and into our places of work as well, too. So also thinking about the current moment we're in, I had a great conversation. We had a private conversation before this conversation we're having right now about what's the state of the union when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that we're seeing is a lot of title shifting across the board. So these are real titles being held by real former D&I practitioners, whether it be from a corporate perspective to a community perspective. The one I found probably the most interesting on there is the one that's in higher education, Vice President of Global and Diaspora Engagement, right? So we're starting to see a lot of these words start to change. We're starting to see a lot of shifts in how we're moving forward with this work that we're doing from a DE&I perspective. But ultimately, there has been a significant shift and where the population is going with regards to D&I practitioners. So a lot of chief diversity officers will be a chief diversity and CDO, so chief diversity officer tied with the CHRO role. We're starting to see that fall off. We're also starting to see the words like change management, engagement, culture, inclusivity. We're starting to see those names start to crop up. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to work towards, folks, is the concept of equity, not equality, right? These two words are not synonyms. So when we think about the difference between equity and equality, I don't think anyone in this room really wants equality, even though they may say it, but what they're after essentially is equity. Because what equality provides is, it creates a scarcity of resources mentality. So whatever we give to one person, we're going to give to the other with the expectation of the same results being able to happen. When we actually should be fighting for equity at the end of the day. So from an equity perspective, it's giving individuals the resources they need in order for them to be successful, which looks different across the board. So as these titles have started to shift, the conversation we had earlier was who cares about the titles at the end of the day? As long as the work is still getting done, that's how we should continue to move forward. So coming from a federal contractor, understanding that funding could be taken away, and one thing I have to say as well too is an executive order does not mean it's law at the end of the day. And we don't need anyone's permission to do what's right at the end of the day as well too. And it should never be a crime to do what's right by people as well too. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here saying that, but I want to consider this not necessarily preaching to the choir, but this is choir rehearsal, right? So the things that we learn here, we want to make sure we sing out into the communities. So again, with my engineering background, I'm not an engineer, but worked a lot of engineers. Going to use a real quick analogy of how I've been able to have success with talking to engineers across the board. So when we think about building probably the most beautiful tower you've ever seen. So when you're building a tower, the beams, the columns, the truss, they all have to be structurally sound. Because what happens to these buildings? You have these outside of our control factors that happen. It rains, there's wind, there's thunder, go thunder, thunder up. But you have all these things that happen to a building, right? So no different from a DE&I perspective, right? To have a sound structural framework from a DE&I perspective, when the headwinds come, when the political conversations happen, when all these things outside of our controls happen, how is your organization going to withstand the winds and the headwinds and the tailwinds and the political scrutiny that may happen to you all when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So at a macro level, some structural systems I've been around. One, I'll quickly speak about my experience at Evergy. So at Evergy, we built a three-pronged strategy when it focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was marketplace, it was workplace, and workforce. So from a marketplace perspective, it was focused on all things we're doing in the community, working with diverse suppliers and the like. Secondly, when it came to the concept of workplace, it was focused on development and engagement. And then the last part, focusing on workforce, it was all built around a talent pipeline. And we were actually able to build in these strategies to enable the business to where it was tied to officer compensation. So now we have an accountability mechanism put in place to ensure that the organization at the highest level was abiding by the structures and strategies that we had there in that space. The second strategy I was able to be a part of was at Black & Beach. Black & Beach is a global engineering firm based out of Kansas City. One of the cool things about that job is they're global, 14,000 engineers across the globe. I was able to have conversations with how does the caste system show up in Mumbai, India, and Pune, India, with regards to hiring practices. Does apartheid South Africa show up when it comes to career mobility? Ensuring that all of our websites in Santiago, Chile were in Spanish, understanding that Spanish in Spain and Mexico and Santiago were very different. So how do we make sure the website is sound in those aspects? So one of the things that we built at Black & Beach was Black & Beach had just rolled out their next generation strategy. They had three columns, right? One was around people, the other was around clients, and then the third was built around growth. So I said, I can't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy over here and then have a company strategy over here. We must infuse the two to make it unmovable. So what I did was similar to what I did at Evergy. I took the people perspective and built it around workplace and workforce. When it came to our customers and clients, it was built around responding to RFPs, requests for proposals. Working for a contractor, if you don't win projects, you don't have a business. And at that time, a lot of those businesses were asking, what are we doing for indigenous people? What are we doing for women? What are we doing for people of color? So being able to build those in, all things being equal, now there's a financial implication to make sure that D&I is built into the framework of how we do business. Then obviously around from a growth perspective, what I stated was the more profitable the organization is, the more things they can do philanthropically. So now we're having a conversation about community. So the community aspect, there was a BV Foundation. We gave X amount of millions of dollars to various organizations. But the other side of that was the piece around environmental justice. So you think about environmental justice. My former organization, I think we're number 8 in building water plants. So now we're having conversations around the Flint, Michigans of the world, the Jackson, Mississippis of the world. How do we ensure that we're building plants to purify drinking water moving forward? So I've seen some really cool structural designs really work to withstand the test of time with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Really quickly, too, thinking about the economic impact that we have. So looking at this cluster of bubbles, all these individuals are in your organizations, they're in your neighborhoods, they're in your backyards, their leadership on this panel. But to enable business, I can't say enough great things about supplier diversity. So I'll go through this one quickly because my time is starting to wane. Focusing on supplier diversity really promotes innovation as well as provides new products and solutions. Also creates multiple channels and procure goods. It creates a lot of healthy competition. And also, too, when we think about the cost and service level, having a large shop versus a small shop, they are a lot more agile, a lot more mobile. So we think about novel projects, we think about novel solutions. The people closest to the issues generally have the best solutions going forward. So I want to do a real quick plug for my supplier diversity brothers and sisters who are in the room. Oh my goodness, so after January 17th, after inauguration day, which was also MLK Day, which is another conversation for another day, my phone has been ringing quite a bit off the hook. I'm sure other D&I practitioners' phones have been ringing off the hook as well too. So I had the opportunity to speak to another chamber in the greater Kansas City, and the conversation we walked into was really kind of setting our mind around, we're going into a warfare type of situation. And the best way to think about a warfare situation is understanding the tactics that are at play. Right, so one tactic you can play, which you've all seen today in the news, is dividing and conquer, right? Group isolation. How do we make people feel othered? How do we isolate individuals, individual talent, or individual groups to make them feel that there is no way? Diversions are happening all the time, so being able to decipher the difference between noise and news, right? So understanding, how do we understand what's really happening, what's real, what's fake? And there's also been a lot of disorientation across the board as well, too, that creates confusion, that creates sheer panic. So we have to understand that tactics are at play in order for us to move forward. And then we also talked about what's at stake. We talked about our head, our hearts, and our health. So from a head perspective, we have to think about how do we get peace of mind psychologically in the space that we're in. You know, people are being deported. We've seen these crazy executive orders being signed. How do we get into the headspace to make sure we're safe? Our hearts, you know, I talk a lot about DE&I, not just being head work, but it's not only hard work, but it's also heart work. Making sure that we're moving forward with our hearts as we move forward as well, too. What was in jeopardy, obviously, was our health. You know, I quickly mentioned the opportunity for environmental justice. And I also talked about there's going to be casualties of war, right? So from a casualty perspective, we're going to lose some people, either to deportation or what have you. There's going to be some Judases, right? So people are going to kiss us on the cheek and then turn around and sell us out up the river. And our faith is ultimately going to be tested as well, too. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of good news. The fact of the matter is that we've been here before. The Apostle Paul writes essentially that this too shall pass in 2 Corinthians. What we did ultimately we mapped out a couple tactics, right? Number one, we coordinated our messages across the board. We wanted to make sure that we were sharing information, sharing data and success across the board. Then also to create cross-sector coalitions across the board. So we're not, essentially we're not doing silo work across the board. And the mantra that we came up with essentially is inclusion isn't a silo, it's a system, and it only thrives when rooted in partnership and it's shared power. So kind of in my wrapping up and my closing, number one, we have to ensure that we're committed and we collaborate, excuse me, and we stay connected. So at the end of the day, when we think about our DE&I strategy, all of us have an opportunity. So if you are a business owner, make sure you're embedding DE&I strategy into your procurement strategies, into your career mobility strategies. And from a civic perspective, make sure that you're leveraging and utilizing your platform as we move forward of civic engagement, ensuring that we're leaving the door open for individuals to come into our communities and do business with us alike. And we all have a oar to pick up to row in this stream, essentially. So essentially kind of going back to my engineering part, inclusion is infrastructure, right? It's how we compete, it's how we innovate, and it's how we build communities and companies that last. Essentially, business forward and community connectedness. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Silas. So what I'm hearing is they might ban the words, but they can't ban the work, right? And more than that, they can't ban it, but we're going to need diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you all for being here, and Silas, thank you for that keynote. I'm now going to ask you to take your comfy seat while I move to introduce our panelists. Oh, yes. And it's now my honor to introduce our other two panelists for today. First, we have Bailey J. Siegfried. Bailey is Vice President of Culture, Communication, and Human Resources at NORDAM, overseeing essential services including safety, compliance, talent development, corporate branding, and communications. He chairs NORDAM's Culture Council and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council and directs the company's sustainability and community engagement initiatives. Siegfried serves as board chair of the Oklahoma Space Industry Development Authority and co-chairs the Tulsa Regional Chamber's Aerospace Council. Actively involved in STEM education and community development, he serves on the boards for Flight Night, Tulsa Area United Way, Tulsa Community Foundation, and the Ascension St. John Hospital Moral and Medical Ethics Board. And next we have Alison Anthony. Alison is President and CEO of the Tulsa Area United Way, a role she has held since 2017. Previously, she served as president of the Williams Foundation and held other leadership roles in community relations, diversity, and organizational effectiveness at Williams. Anthony has served on numerous boards, including Tulsa Community Foundation, CAP Tulsa, and the Community Service Council. She received master's and bachelor's degrees from Oklahoma State University and has completed several leadership training programs, including the Harvard Talent Pipeline Development Program, the University of Tulsa Mini MBA, and Senior Human Resources Professional Certification from the Society of Human Resources Management. Our moderator for today's panel will be Jonathan Long, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Tulsa Regional Chamber. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Hannah. Note to my team, don't ever put me behind Alison Anthony's bio, please. No, Bailey, Alison, Silas, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you all for being here as we talk through this moment in time with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I shared with the group earlier that this state of inclusion is different. It's different. This moment we've seen before, but this time feels different than what we felt over the last couple of years. Show of hands, if you at some point over the last couple of years have been frustrated with the time or have asked yourself like, hey, where are we at? What are we doing? Show of hands. Show of hands. So, with that, my first question to this group is, what is a small or personal habit or ritual that helps you show up as an inclusive leader, even on the hard days?
I pray, I meditate, and I wake up in the morning and I go through Socrates' 3 gates. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I say, make sure today when I speak that I am telling the truth, that I am being kind, or if it's not a kind thing I have to say it kindly. And is it necessary? Does it add to the message, or does it take away? And then I also really am a student of history, and in Oklahoma we have no shortage of heroes, and I really draw strength from heroes from our history, like Clara Luper, who led the Cats drugstore sit-in 1958. With her courage and collaboration in the community, she rewrote the rules of history and changed the course for our state because she was brave enough not necessarily to stand up but to sit down.
Similar. It's a deep faith. So my prayer usually is always, Lord, allow me to be a vessel for any conversation I'm having. I pray that you just work through me and allow your words to flow like water, and ensure that whatever is pronounced is not me, but it's through you.
For me, also faith, but I start every morning. If you know me, I can cover a lot of ground real quick. So I say, dear Lord, please enter my head before I do, so that I may be useful. and that vessel. And then in a practical approach, it's about presence. I have the blessed opportunity to be a part of an amazing family and company with amazing people. And when things are tough or when things get off center, I can recenter and ground by just going out and seeing our people, listening, being present. And that's really where everything starts from, which people, it's what humanity is about. So listening and being present.
Bailey always says leadership is love. I've heard him say that, and was our first DEI chair of our advisory council at United Way, and led with that. But first, love, and then go from there. And I admire that leadership quality.
I look at the band on my hand, and it says life is about love, and that's the beginning of everything for me.
I love leadership is love. Leadership is love. Let's stay there. Bailey, with that being said, what role does leadership play for you in modeling and sustaining NORDAM's company's culture of belonging?
Sure. So it's my whole purpose. And leadership and love and culture. I had the great opportunity that my sister saw that after 45 years of NORDAM, now we're in our 57th year, as you grow, and when my mom and dad founded the company in 1969, it was based on, love and family, and we needed to recenter on that. And for us, that's the culture. And while some say that's a soft thing, it's actually the hard thing. I like to think of it as it's the quantum culture. It's like in all things, all at once, everything all at the same time. And it's hard to wrap your arms around. And it begins back to love. And I believe that leadership is love, and that it's the ability to unlock the love within others. So if you recenter yourself into what your purpose is and something deeper, I think you can be more present and connect. And what was the question again? I did that for you.
It's okay, Mandy. No, I think, Bailey, you touched upon how you all have been able to really help build a culture of belonging and how you model that for your employees over at NORDAM.
Yeah, it is culture, it's engagement, and it's seeing people where they're at and listening in presence. And as a family, we have a constant effort to make sure to connect, because at least for us, when we go back to that deeper center, is that these people put me through my life, and I have that, and my family has that to pay back and give back. So we're forever thankful and centered on making sure they're taken care of. So we are blessed to have a deeper root in our purpose. And as I said, as you all know me, I like to surround myself with people smarter than me and people I trust. And I've done that with people in the room. And I have a great team, and they help ideas turn to life. And through April and Joel and Mandy and the team and the talent team and Mike, they turn good stuff into results and reality. And you have to measure those results to make sure that they're not just good ideas. You have to be effective, or else you don't get the same budget the next year. You don't accomplish things. So you also have to show up and deliver results, which is essential.
No, thank you. You have to show up and deliver results. I think we say that and we think, this big thing, like, we got to get these big projects, these big things we have to do to move forward. But Silas, if you would, what's one thing that every leader in this room, and when I say that, I don't want anybody to be like, I don't hold a leadership title. Leadership is an activity, not a position. It's an activity that we all can participate in. So what's one thing that every leader in this room can start doing to strengthen inclusion as a part of their organizational culture?
This may sound very, elementary, but be curious. right? And be curious in the aspect of wanting to understand what people's motivators are, what their drivers are. Are they intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? So the best leaders that I've ever been around are leaders that have taken interest in the work that I'm doing. Leaders that have taken interest in understanding my family dynamics, taken interest in what's happening in the community as well too. So I'll say curiosity, honestly, is probably one of the most important factors to have as a leader. And like you said, it doesn't matter where you are on the team. Take interest in one another, right? But at the end of the day, no one's going to look out for you except for people closest to you, your family members. I just had a chance to be back at home yesterday. My mother is taking care of her mother, which is my grandmother. And the closest person to her is my mom. And she's taken interest in where she's going, her medicine, are the nurses showing up. So she has become essentially a trustee for her. So for all of us, we are trustees of one another. We have to be our brothers' keepers. We have to be our sisters' keepers. So best leaders are the most curious leaders to move forward in understanding what motivates people, what scares people. How do I make sure I show up for individuals every single day?
Thank you, Silas. And one of the things that we tend to see when we do that is collaboration. We tend to see people working together, coming together to accomplish certain goals. Alison, you worked across a lot of different sectors. What's a lesson you've learned about how collaboration can drive inclusion?
I think we're sunk without it. You know, we have to not only have leaders who are curious, but in this time that we're in and so much division, you have to have leaders who are willing to say, well, it's not just enough to say we're mad, or it's not just enough to shut down and say, well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. You have to say, well, why are you mad? Why are you hurting? You know, are you hurting because you're afraid for someone you love? I think about that sitting at this table was Chef Jeff from the food bank. So policy that impacts children not having food, he sees those people in their eyes every day. So it's not just about politics, it's about those people. It's about Julie Davis, who, you know, one minute we were having accolades in this community for taking care of the Afghan refugees. We were celebrating that and doing such a good job. And then there was an executive order to stop taking care of the Afghan refugees. And so, you know, those can be political divisions, but you have to, as a leader, to collaborate, you have to say, well, help me understand how this is impacting real people. And I'll give one great example in our community. I work with amazing collaborators every day, and one of them is a collaboration grant at United Way. We have collaboration grants, and one is at Impact Tulsa that we fund. And so they proudly call themselves data nerds, you know, data geeks. And so they were looking at the data, and you're not going to be surprised that if you are facing eviction as a child, or if you are evicted, your academic scores go down. So there's correlation. And so they started saying, well, what is the process? We see the data, but what is the process? So they worked with TPS in collaboration to establish a process to say, when a child is on the eviction docket list, let's make sure we're informing the family and then wrapping our arms around them and see if we can be proactive to keep them from getting evicted. So that's just one example, and you're maybe sitting there thinking, well, what does that have to do with DEI? Well, making sure that every child has a chance to have safe and stable housing and food, and, you know, to be able to be their best and have opportunities for economic mobility, to hopefully be in Bill Knight's wonderful program around career exploration, or, you know, opportunities to shadow in the Next Gen program. We have to collaborate to get kids to a point to be able to do that, and we see it every day. And the business community is so important in that too.
Thank you, Alison. That's so well said. And as we talk about data and we talk about outcomes, I'd like for you to all kind of to take the time to think about it and share, as we do our best to try to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion and make progress in this work. What are some of the signs or outcomes that will tell us that we're seeing business growth and community well-being by doing this work? Because I think it's important for us to recognize that this isn't going to change overnight. So what are the things that we'll see over time? Just those little things that give us a glimmer of hope, like, all right, hey, we are making some progress. Things are getting better.
I can speak to United Way's 5-year strategic directions. You know, we want to make sure in this community that more people are earning a living wage. You know, nearly half of our community does not make a living wage, meaning without help, they can't afford childcare. I'm looking at Autumn here on the front row. I know, you know, she has little ones. It's very expensive. So we talk a lot about helping people have that economic mobility and giving people the opportunity to grow their careers. And I think more families have access to health care and healthy food. Thank you, Chef Jeff, and all the folks that do that in this community. I think we have a workforce that's living in quality, stable housing and can afford to live here and work here because they have housing. And I know, you know, these aren't you're hearing, this isn't DEI initiative. This is about meeting people where they are, and that we can celebrate as families, united for working families is what we talk about, and that the families are celebrating when their kids are walking across the stage and graduating and have opportunities to continue their education. And then as a community, we're able to, when hard times come, and they will. I see Wes Mitchell, who's the executive director of 211 of Eastern Oklahoma. 240,000 times last year, somebody reached out to 211 of Eastern Oklahoma and said, I don't know where to turn for help. More than half of them were working people, and more than half of them were first-time callers or first-time outreach. So we know families need those things, and those things are the same things that we have to have as a business community to thrive. So that's where the collaboration has to happen. What do we do together to make sure those things happen? That's how we know we'll be successful.
Bailey, what do you see in your workplace that lets you know you're being successful?
Sure. So we have a dashboard that lets us know how we're recruiting, who we're recruiting, who comes online, and then who stays with us through turnover. And this is something that is in our strategic plan, across a 5-year strategic plan, and we look at often. So knowing how well we're doing is right there in the numbers with the data. We are making progress. Just a small story that goes beyond just NORDAM is the work that the Chamber's doing with the support of its Aerospace Council and the other aerospace companies in the area. I tell this at every meeting that we do, is that in aerospace, if you want to hire somebody and you require aerospace experience, right then automatically you're going to get 4 people that walk in the room and only 1 will be female, because that is the current demographic of aerospace. And going beyond that, if you want aerospace experience, you're going to get 10 people that walk in the room and less than 1 is a person of color. And we all know that a diverse team like synergy makes for better outcomes and a stronger working team. And so not only do you have to be intentional about your recruiting, you have to be intentional about retaining, engaging, because a person that shows up their whole self stays longer. And that's where we have these impact efforts from our different councils of belonging, community engagement, to make sure that it doesn't matter who you are, who you love, how you were born, how you identify, you will be loved here. And it goes back to something that is very deep to me. If you close your eyes, everybody, let's do it real quick. Close your eyes. Think about somebody you love. What do you want for that person? And that is the core and the center of how we make decisions. As if you're a parent, that you find out real quick how that comes. You have to make terrible decisions sometimes. You know, Christmas isn't happening, or it's different. We're not going on that trip. Like, things change, and you have to make, and same for yourself. You don't sleep 2 nights because of something, and it hurts you, but it's better for the whole. And I saw my parents do it. They instilled it in us, and I wouldn't be here without them, literally, but also our company. Wouldn't be there without the real members that make us a family company, because it's not the Siegfrieds, it's the stakeholders, because they are the ones that pull this together. So we've been through hell and back multiple times. Some of you all have seen it, experienced it, and we will always put our people first. And that's what a parent does, and that's what we'll do, and that's what helps us stay centered. And that's why being intentional with the measurements and monitoring them from the CEO all the way to the front line matters.
Off of Bailey's for a second too, talking about dashboards. One area that I've been able to have success with building to be able to show metrics is one of the hardest things to do is measuring culture, right? How do you measure a feeling? How do you measure something that's intangible, something you can't actually touch? So one thing that I've been able to do in my previous two organizations, I'm doing some contracting work on this right now, is looking at cultural engagement surveys. So taking that cultural engagement survey, being able to break that down to understanding from an age perspective, from an ethnicity perspective, from a tenure perspective, really understanding what it's like to be a female at your organization, who is the highest ranked female, and how do they feel as though they have a voice in the organization. So being able to take that information and showing it to the senior leadership team and saying, hey, this is what the culture for this demographic looks like. For our people that are under a certain age, of a veteran status, you're able to show that opportunity. Because why that's important is culture. We all know that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We all know that. So as I've had lots of conversations with high school students and with college students alike, one thing that I'm trying to push them towards is when they're in their interview process is ask about the culture of the organization. A lot of times the culture is seen optically, so trying to create this concept of optical normality. So when you see yourself at the C-suite or at the senior director level, if I were to show up at this company, do I see someone that looks like me? And how we're able to attract and retain that is through culture. So being able to build out metrics to be able to share with senior leadership team to understand what the demographics are saying, and the demographics will tell you what the culture is like for said organization.
No, that's great. Let's stay there for a second, Silas. And you've worked with several different companies and continue to walk through understanding different industries. Where do you see gaps in how companies talk about their cultural efforts and then how they're embodied within their structure?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing I would say is every organization, whether you are a for-profit, nonprofit, large organization, small organization, LLC, what have you, you need to define what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean for your organization. How does it show up? We had a quick closed-door conversation, and one thing I try to deter organizations from doing is utilizing language such as justice. If you're an infrastructure organization, that you're building power plants, building service centers, you're not really in the justice game. So why is justice a part of your strategy? Where can you be making an impact? So again, if you are building wastewater treatment plants, you should have an environmental justice strategy, and that's how your DE&I strategy shows up. So a lot of what we've been saying up here on the stage too is, why is this DE&I? Because it's doing the right thing for the right people at the right time, right? It's understanding that these aren't DE&I principles or strategies. It's a human strategy of how we move forward. So when we think about how this work shows up, essentially, it's what impact can your organization have? And then with the DE&I, if the headwinds and the political scrutiny and the public scrutiny comes in on this topic called DE&I, are you strong enough to withstand those headwinds? Because this is how we're defining it. So to heck with the titles. We don't care if you're called a chief diversity officer or a head of culture and talent pipeline. If your title switches from this to that, if you're still doing the work, then that's what matters the most. So we can't get caught up on the fact of titles being changed, what's being printed in the media, what the executive's orders are saying. And again, an executive order is not law. So don't simply feel like you have to retreat because an executive order is back. All we have to do is we don't have to restructure, just redesign your strategy. So as long as the work is still getting done, that's what matters the most. So again, when we think about the strategy going forward at what organizations can do of how this work is getting done, it's understanding at a fundamental level of what's my strategy, what's my language am I using? Am I using language now? Obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a four-letter word, right? People saying DE&I has died, right? D-I-E-D, right? But I'm seeing new language around belonging was a thing that was happening, and that as DE&I-B, that was starting to shape up. But one element that I've been trying to talk about is the A, which is access, right? Access from a neurodivergent perspective, access from a rural America perspective, access from a socioeconomic perspective. Now, these concepts now are more broad and more general than they have been in the past, because at the back of our minds, it's been acutely focused on the other, right? The minority, which I have an issue with that word, which I'll get into maybe a little bit later on today. But when we think about the concept of the work that we're trying to get done, essentially it's for everyone, and everyone has a space to play in this space. So ultimately, it's defining how D&I shows up. Whether you have D&I on your moniker or on your wall, you're still doing the work at the end of the day. Whether you're engaged in the community, whether you're building, you're doing aerospace, whatever it is that you're doing, you're making an impact in those communities. So if you're able to talk to your organization from a leadership level, say, hey, this nomenclature is gone, but the work is still here. This is how it's showing up. So when you go to recruit to high schools, when you go to recruit to colleges, when those students show up, they see themselves, they feel it when they show up. It's that cultural piece. And then we go back to measure it based on the cultural assessments.
Thank you, Silas. I want to give one quick follow-up to that and ask, because, you know, we think about our organizations, and for some of us, we have these large organizations with employees all across the country or the world, and then some of us, we have smaller organizations where we might be a 1, 2, 3 person shop. But can you talk a little bit about how individually employees can stand in those gaps? Because I think sometimes it's easy to just say, oh, well, our organization doesn't do that, so, oh, well. But like, how can individual employees stand in those gaps to kind of help create that inclusive culture?
Yeah, so I'll answer that two ways. So one, kind of going back to what are the gaps, right? So understanding for said organization, are you on the front lines for justice, right? What I've had in situations in my previous employer was, there was a big conversation about trans rights and how is the organization going to show up in that space. Whereas the organization wasn't positioned to speak outright on those, but the organization was working with various organizations that do support those efforts. So being able to put your organization in the space that, hey, where our organization may not make a statement on this particular topic, but we do support the other organizations, which are the nonprofits that are supported by other for-profit organizations, to be able to, for you to build that message in. So one other gap I see too is organizations remaining mute and silent on topics out of fear or for whatever, but partnering with, you know, an Urban League or a United Way or Big Brothers and Big Sisters or whatever the organization may be, UNIDOS, connecting with those organizations. Now, as far as connecting to the organizations that are smaller, it goes back to the conversation of being curious, right? Having a small, lean shop, which I feel like those organizations are probably can have more of an impact because they're a lot more mobile. They can have a quicker impact. They don't have to go through the bureaucracy of having a board meeting and a board of trustees meeting. Those organizations are a lot more agile. So I would always encourage you all from a gap perspective is understanding what niche that you have in your organization to make an impact on the community and live within that space of how can I make an impact by having conversations with the individuals within that organization of, hey, what should we do different? Because this is what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing in my community. Our organization really could make an impact in that space. So the smaller companies, I would say, are better situated to make a bigger impact because they are so small, they are nimble, be able to make an impact in those different sectors, but having those conversations.
I want to add to that question about individuals, because at the end of the day, we all know in here, we only have control over our own self. You know, we might want to solve everyone else's problems, but life keeps reminding me, Alison, you are not learning this lesson, so let me remind you again, you only have control over your own self, you know, and so no offense to anyone who has a DEI title, because I've had some too, but I've also been doing this since the mid-'80s and have been called a lot of things, you know, since, I know, a long time. And so I think about the work, so if you want great talent, make sure as a hiring manager that you're working hard to get a diverse talent pool. You know, make sure that if you want as a leader to build great culture that you're doing and going to the trouble of listening and understanding that someone might be afraid for their child, you know, and that's why they're worried about when they come to work that day. And just doing the work individually makes all the difference. And then I think as leaders in an organization, whatever the organization is, I think one of the most impactful things we've done for our culture at United Way is we did market analysis and compensation analysis and looked at the living wage and said, hey, are we out there doing living wage presentations and creating our own clients here because we're not paying a living wage, you know? And we share that, and we've had bankers on our board say, wow, we thought since minimum wage was $7.25 and we were paying $11 that we were paying great, you know, and then they realized, like, that's not living wage. So asking yourself, what can I do as a leader? And when we get out there and volunteer and get to know, I always said at Williams that somebody can be mad at you if you put a pipeline in their backyard, but they're not going to be mad at you if you're tutoring their kid in math, you know? So we have to welcome different voices and experiences as individuals. We don't lose our identity in this community. When we do that, we deepen it. We don't lose unity. We build a stronger, truer community when we each show up with those qualities.
Thing real quick. So thinking about leaders as well too is us as leaders have an opportunity to reinforce that behavior, right? So when we see it happen, we want to give the pat on the back. We want to reinforce, whether it be monetary, whether it be just a quick email or even a pat on the back. We want to reinforce that behavior because at the end of the day, leaders, especially executives, we're the only ones that can get to create the environment, the culture in which all of our employees live up under. So reinforcement of those positive things that we're seeing is also a gap that I sometimes see. So we need to seek out those individuals that are doing and going above and beyond and reinforcing that behavior.
Thank you both for that. Because I think when we're talking about specifically making progress in this area, being a leader just in general to me requires you to do three things. And these three things kind of change as you go through. One, you have to create a vision. Now, every leader doesn't get to create a vision. Some leaders have to build alignment for whatever that vision is. But I think one area where we all can play a part is championing the execution of whatever that vision is. And I think if we want to have an inclusive company culture, we have to champion that execution, even if we're not building a vision for it. And I think as we've talked through this panel today, everybody in here has a role to play in that. This isn't just the name on those cards on the middle of your table. This is everybody's responsibility to do that. Because if we want to grow Northeast Oklahoma, we have to make it a welcoming place for everyone. And that looks like a lot of different things. And that means we have a lot of different roles that we get to play in making that happen. So as we come to an end, I would like to give everybody an opportunity. We'll go 60 to 90 seconds. Silas, that means 30 seconds. To just share what this work means to you and what it needs to mean for our region, for us to continue to move forward.
30 seconds? 30 seconds. All right. I live in Kansas City. I watch my home state from afar. I am overjoyed to see this happening, that you're continuing this work. Watching my home state become a very brick red state, I was not anticipating this happening. When I told my mom what I was doing, she said, they still doing that here? I said, yeah, Mama, we're still doing this here, right? So, and she lives in Oklahoma City. I think I mentioned that previously. So I'm encouraged by the work we have to do. I mentioned in our closed door conversation earlier that this is almost in a way kind of the Underground Railroad in a lot of ways, right? So the people that are sitting at your tables, these are your allies, right? These are the individuals that help us wade through the wilderness of this time of uncertainty. So leaning into these conversations for me is really encouraging to know that there are people still out here trying to do this good work. And at the end of the day, we don't need anyone's permission to do the work that we know what we need to do.
United Way turned 100 years old last year. We celebrated, and so we're in our 101st, our second century. That means we've done this work under, and I feel like it today sometimes, 100 years, 18 presidents, you know? And so I'm sure all of them had different perspectives and political wins, but you have to keep going back to your strategy and say, you know, our mission is that we unite people and resources to improve lives and strengthen this community. It doesn't say, except for those people. We don't strengthen that part of the community. You know, we don't say that. And so no one, since the 80s, when I was called Multicultural Affairs, no one has ever been able to tell me that treating people with dignity and respect is bad for business. That's just not true. You know, showing up and making sure that we're lifting up talent and giving youth opportunities, that's good for business. You know, so making sure that people feel on Sunday night like they want to come to work on Monday morning, that's good for business, and that's what we're talking about here. So I think when I think about our future, I want my 5 children, well, I have 4 that are back in Tulsa, 1 in London. I want all of them here, and I want them all to feel welcome and valued, like this is a place they want to raise their family.
Beautiful. Gosh, for me, I believe that only those who can see the invisible can do the impossible. So leadership and engagement is that ability to see what others might not see, to unlock the love within others, to make a difference in their life, as well as your own and your organization and those that that you love around you. And every day, it's an opportunity to make a difference. So, gosh, I'm just honored and privileged to be here, but recognizing that leadership is a privilege is also a driver in making a difference, because you have to work at it, you have to be intentional, and then you have to measure those results to make sure you're making a difference. So, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Can we get a round of applause for our panelists today? And I want to say thank you to all of you all for being in support of this event as Hannah comes to bring us to a close. And then I'm also going to ask for a round of applause for our 3 chairs being here today. That's important. Our leadership is here, and that's important. So please give a hand to our 3 chairs. For being in support of not just this event, but for the work that we do in diversity and inclusion in this community. Thank you, Hannah.
Well, thank you, Alison, Bailey, and Silas, and thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'm going to go off script for 1 second. Bailey asked you to close your eyes and think about someone you love, and I want you to open your eyes and look around this room, because there's 400 people here that want that person you love to be successful, no matter who they are. Thank you all again for joining us at the Chamber's State of Inclusion. Before we adjourn, please take note of some of the Chamber's upcoming events. Let me get my props. There was a card on your seat to remind you to nominate your favorite local small business for the Chamber's 2025 Tulsa Small Business Awards. This event honors the region's small business leaders for their work not only in business, but also the region's business community. Nominations close on Monday, June 2nd, which is this coming Monday. And the Small Business Awards will be on September 25th. Other upcoming events, the State of Workforce and Talent will be on July 17th. State of Workforce and Talent examines trends, innovation, and opportunities in the workforce and talent ecosystem, and probably diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mosaic, the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coalition, will hold its June monthly meeting on Wednesday, June 18th. Mosaic meetings are free to attend and offer a space for businesses to learn and discuss ways for their organizations to improve DEI practices. You can register for all the Chamber's upcoming events at tulsachamber.com/events. Finally, thank you again to the generous sponsors who made today's events possible. Please take note of the businesses listed in your program and call on them whenever possible. Please stay safe and have a great day.